AITA for getting really jealous over my ex-husband's new girlfriend. My ex-husband didn't just move on. He upgraded. I'm talking about a 20-something, gluten-free, marathon-running, pediatric nurse who volunteers at a puppy shelter on weekends. And last Tuesday, I found out she's been teaching my son how to play the guitar. The one I bought him. The one that's been sitting in his closet for 2 years. Some people would call my reaction unhinged jealousy. I call it a perfectly normal response to a woman who is literally trying to speedrun my life, but better. But maybe I'm the one who's wrong. You tell me.
Hey, story lover. Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go.
Let's call my ex-husband James. And his replacement? Let's call her Olivia. The name itself sounds like it should be written in cursive on a scented thank you card. The kind of name that belongs to someone who probably irons her bedsheets and sends handwritten notes to the mailman at Christmas. For the first 6 months after our divorce was finalized, things were civil. We had found a rhythm that worked for co-parenting our 10-year-old son, Noah. It was a fragile, carefully constructed peace treaty, built on scheduled pickup times and polite, surface-level conversations about school projects and dentist appointments. We spoke in the clipped, professional tones of former lovers who had learned to navigate the minefield of shared custody without stepping on any buried explosives. I thought I was over him. I really did. I had toasted to my fresh start with my friends at a wine bar downtown, raising my glass to freedom and new beginnings. I had even gone on a few dates that were pleasantly, forgettably mediocre. A divorced accountant who talked extensively about his model train collection, a widowed teacher who seemed lovely but kissed like he was performing CPR. I was free. Or so I told myself every morning as I drank my coffee alone in a kitchen that no longer echoed with arguments about whose turn it was to load the dishwasher. Then Olivia appeared. It started subtly, a mention from Noah about Dad's friend who made the best pancakes he'd ever tasted. "Better than IHOP, Mom. Can you believe that?" he'd said with the kind of innocent cruelty only children can manage. Then a picture popped up on a mutual friend's social media feed. James was at a barbecue, and there was a woman standing next to him, her hand resting casually on his arm. She was laughing, head tilted back, a cascade of perfect blonde hair catching the sunlight like spun gold in a fairy tale. She looked bright, healthy, uncomplicated, everything I hadn't felt like in years. A hot, sick wave of something I hadn't felt in years washed over me. It started in my chest, that familiar burn of recognition and loss, then spread through my limbs like poison. It was ugly. It was potent. It was jealousy in its purest, most undiluted form. I did what any well-adjusted, emotionally stable person would do. I spent the next 3 hours conducting a deep-dive investigation into her online presence, armed with a bottle of wine and the kind of desperate curiosity that makes people slow down at car accidents. Her profiles were public, of course. Why wouldn't they be? She had nothing to hide. Her life was an open book of curated perfection, a highlight reel that made my own existence look like a blooper reel in comparison. There she was, Olivia Taylor, smiling from the top of a mountain she'd just hiked, her cheeks flushed with the kind of healthy glow that comes from clean living and good genes. Here she was holding a tiny, premature baby in the NICU where she worked, a look of angelic compassion on her face that made me want to throw my laptop across the room. There she was again, crossing the finish line of a half marathon, barely breaking a sweat while I got winded walking up the stairs to my second-floor apartment. The pictures told a story of a woman who had never met a challenge she couldn't conquer with a smile and determination. Rock climbing in Colorado, volunteering at a soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, teaching English to elderly immigrants. She was the kind of person who probably composted and knew the names of all her neighbors and never, ever left dishes in the sink overnight. It was nauseating. I tried to tell myself it wasn't about her. It was about what she represented. She was the life I could have had if I hadn't, well, if things hadn't happened the way they did. If I hadn't spent the last 5 years moving through the world like a ghost of my former self. But that justification felt thin, tissue paper fragile, and it evaporated completely last Tuesday. Noah came home from his weekend with James buzzing with excitement, practically vibrating with the kind of joy that makes 10-year-olds forget to put their backpacks away. He dropped his school bag by the door with his usual carelessness and said, "Mom, look." His voice was pitched with the excitement usually reserved for snow days and ice cream trucks. He ran to his room and came back with the acoustic guitar I'd bought him for his 8th birthday. The one he'd begged for after seeing a street musician downtown. The one I'd saved for and researched and wrapped with such hope. The one he'd taken 3 lessons for before declaring it too hard and abandoning it in the back of his closet like a broken promise. He sat on the couch, his small fingers fumbling for a moment with the strings, his tongue poking out in concentration. Then he plucked out a shaky but unmistakably recognizable version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The notes weren't perfect, but they were deliberate, purposeful. He was actually playing music. I smiled, my heart doing a little flip of maternal pride. "Noah, that's amazing. You've been practicing." He beamed, his face alight with the kind of pride that comes from mastering something new. "Olivia taught me. She's really good. She said my fingers are perfect for the chords and that I'm a natural. She knows how to play like everything, even the songs from that video game I like." And just like that, the air was sucked out of the room. Olivia, of course. It wasn't enough that she was saving bobbies and puppies and running 12 miles before breakfast. Now she was unlocking my son's hidden musical talents. She was succeeding where I had failed, where I had given up after 3 expensive lessons and his lack of interest. The smile on my face felt like it was cracking, a mask that no longer fit properly. It was a petty, ridiculous thought, but I couldn't shake it. She was better at being me than I was. She was the mother I had tried to be, the woman who had patience for teaching moments and the skills to back them up. She was version 2, and I was the buggy original that kept crashing. "That's wonderful, honey," I managed, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "Maybe you can show me what else you've learned." But even as Noah launched into an enthusiastic demonstration of his new skills, all I could think about was her hands guiding his fingers to the frets, her voice encouraging him when the notes didn't come out right, her patient smile as she taught him something I couldn't. Something I had failed to do. That night after Noah was asleep, the green-eyed monster came out to play. I told myself I was just going for a drive to clear my head, but somehow I found myself in my car at 10 p.m., parked across the street from Bella Vista, a trendy bistro James and I used to love during the early days of our marriage. It was the kind of place, with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb lighting, that made everyone look romantic and mysterious. And there they were, sitting at a table by the window, bathed in the warm glow of the lights like actors on a perfectly lit stage. They were sharing a dessert, tiramisu, I could see from my stalker's perch, and laughing about something. But it was the way he was looking at her that made my chest tight. It was a look of pure, unadulterated admiration, the kind of expression that suggested he couldn't quite believe his luck. It was the look he used to give me, back when we first met and he thought I was magic. I watched him lean across the table to brush a crumb from her cheek, and she caught his hand, holding it against her face for a moment that was so intimate I felt like a voyeur. They looked like a couple in the honeymoon phase, drunk on each other's presence and convinced they had invented love. I felt a profound sense of erasure, like I was a rough draft and she was the polished, final copy. Like all those years of marriage, all the memories we'd built and the life we'd created had been nothing more than practice for this moment, a rehearsal for the real thing. I watched them for a few more minutes, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't just about a guitar. This was about a woman who seemed to be a living, breathing, perfect replica of the woman I always tried to be before life got in the way, before the complications, before the grief, before I learned that sometimes love isn't enough to hold things together when the world falls apart. It was like he was trying to replace me, stock, barrel, and lock, and I had this terrifying feeling that this was only the beginning. The real question was, what was I going to do about it? The following week, James called. His tone was breezy, casual, the voice of a man who had found his footing again after years of stumbling in the dark. "Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. I'm thinking of taking Noah up to the cabin at Pinecrest Lake for the weekend. Just the two of us. Some father-son bonding time. You know how he loves the fishing." Pinecrest Lake. My blood went cold. That cabin wasn't just any cabin. It was our place, the rustic A-frame we'd rented every summer for 5 years running. It was where we took Noah for his first real vacation when he was 4, where we taught him how to skip stones and identify constellations and build the perfect s'more. It was where we'd sat on the wraparound porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the water while Noah chased fireflies in the growing darkness. After the divorce, we had established rules. Not many, but the few we had were sacred. One simple, unspoken rule: you don't bring anyone new into the sacred spaces. The places that belonged to our original family of 3, the memories we'd built when we still believed we were forever. It was about protecting Noah's associations, keeping some corners of his childhood pure and untainted by the complicated reality of our new family structure. I hesitated, a knot tightening in my stomach like a fist. "Oh, okay, just you two then." "Yeah, of course," he said, a little too quickly, in the tone people use when they're not quite lying but not quite telling the whole truth either. "Just us guys. Noah's been asking about going fishing, and you know how much he loves it up there." I wanted to press to ask more questions, but I caught myself. I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the jealousy was making me see threats where none existed. He had said just the two of us. I had to trust him. We were divorced, not enemies. Maybe this was a good thing. A chance for him to reconnect with Noah without any distractions. "That sounds great," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "He'll love it, just be careful on the lake." "Always am," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We'll be back Sunday evening." The weekend came and went. I tried to enjoy the quiet, the rare opportunity to sleep in and eat cereal for dinner and watch romantic comedies without having to explain the plot to a 10-year-old. But an undercurrent of anxiety hummed beneath the surface, a low-grade worry I couldn't quite shake. Sunday evening, I was scrolling through my phone, waiting for them to get back, when a new post popped up in my feed. It was from Sarah Chen, another parent from Noah's school, a woman I knew well enough to exchange pleasantries with at pickup, but not well enough to call a friend. The picture was a group shot, taken on the dock at Pinecrest Lake in the golden light of late afternoon. There were several families there, all smiling in that casual way of people who are genuinely happy and not performing for the camera. And in the center of the photo, there was James. And next to him, with her arm looped through his like they belonged together, was Olivia. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she was wearing a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. And on James's other side was our son, Noah, holding up a fish he'd clearly just caught, his face split with a grin so wide it made my chest ache. They looked like a family. Not a blended family or a complicated family or a work-in-progress family. They looked like the kind of nuclear family you see in stock photos, all golden light and easy happiness. He didn't just break the rule, he shattered it in the most public, humiliating way possible. The lie wasn't even the worst part. It was the image. The 3 of them, framed against the backdrop of my most cherished memories, looking so perfectly, disgustingly happy. It was the visual representation of everything I'd lost and everything she'd gained. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number, scrolled to his contact with the shaking hands of someone about to detonate a bomb. He answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful and relaxed. "Hey, we just pulled in. Noah's exhausted, he had the best time. You should have seen the size of the bass he caught." "You lied to me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm breaks. The cheerfulness vanished from his tone instantly. "What are you talking about?" "Pinecrest, you told me it would be just you and Noah. I saw the pictures, James, she was there. You took her to our place." There was a long pause, and I could hear him thinking, calculating, probably wondering how much I knew. Look, it wasn't planned. A few other families were up there, and Olivia knows Sarah Chen from her yoga class, so I invited her to come up for the day on Saturday. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. My voice rose, cracking with a fury that had been simmering for weeks. It was our spot, James. It was for us, for Noah's memories of his parents together. You don't just get to overwrite them with her. Jennifer, you need to calm down, he said, his voice taking on that condescending tone I remembered from our worst fights, the one that suggested I was being irrational and emotional while he remained the voice of reason. This is exactly why I didn't tell you. I knew you'd have this unhinged, jealous reaction. She is part of my life now. You have to accept that. Noah had a great time. He loves her. That was the final blow. He loves her. The words echoed in my ears like a death knell. I felt myself unraveling, all the careful composure I'd built over the past 6 months crumbling like a house of cards. This isn't about jealousy, I yelled, knowing even as I said it that it sounded exactly like it was about jealousy. This is about respect, about the promises we made to protect our son, about not bringing strangers into the places that are supposed to be sacred. You're being dramatic, he shot back, and I could hear him moving, probably going into another room so Noah wouldn't hear us fighting. I've moved on, lock, stock, and barrel. It's time you did the same. He hung up. I stood in my silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone and feeling like I'd been slapped. Lock, stock, and barrel. The phrase snagged in my brain like a fishhook. It was an old saying, one his grandfather used to use when talking about selling the family farm. But hearing it now, in this context, it felt like he was locking me out and turning over the key to her. I sank into a chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a perfect new girlfriend anymore. This was a battle for the narrative of our family's history, and I was losing. But as the days passed, a strange feeling began to gnaw at me. Something about Olivia felt familiar in a way that had nothing to do with her resemblance to my younger self. It was deeper than that, more visceral. There was something about her eyes, the shape of her smile, the way she held her head when she laughed. It was like a word on the tip of my tongue that I couldn't quite grasp. Let me be crystal clear about something. I do not want James back. I wouldn't take him back if he was the last man on earth and came with a winning lottery ticket and a guarantee that he'd do his share of the housework. Our marriage had died a slow, suffocating death long before we signed the papers, weathered by a quiet tragedy that we never learned how to navigate together. We had become strangers living in the same house, tiptoeing around a wound so deep it had infected everything we touched. So when I felt that hot, sick wave of jealousy wash over me seeing him with Olivia, it completely terrified me, because it had nothing to do with wanting him back and everything to do with her, with what she represented, with the life she was building on the foundation of the one I'd lost. For days after the Pinecrest incident, I couldn't shake that strange feeling, that nagging sense of familiarity whenever I looked at her picture. I found myself staring at her social media posts with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle, searching for clues in the background of her photos, analyzing the comments from her friends, looking for some explanation for why she made my skin crawl in a way that went beyond simple jealousy. I became obsessed. I scrolled back, years back, through her digital life like an archaeologist digging through layers of time. College photos from UC Davis, family vacations to Lake Tahoe, posts about nursing school and clinical rotations. I was looking for a connection, a clue, anything that would explain this bizarre, visceral reaction I was having to a complete stranger. My search led me to an old box in the back of my closet, the kind of cardboard container that holds the detritus of a life lived. I hadn't looked at it since the divorce, when I'd packed up everything that hurt too much to see on a daily basis. It was the before box. Before the split, before the silence took over our house like a toxic gas, before we learned that some kinds of grief are too big for love to contain. The box was filled with papers I hadn't looked at in years, old report cards for Noah, photos from happier times, medical files I'd kept out of some misguided sense that they might be important someday. And that's when my heart stopped. I pulled out a thick manila folder, the kind hospitals use for important documentation. The label on it was one I tried my best to never read, written in my own handwriting from 5 years ago when my penmanship was shakier and my world was falling apart. It was from the hospital. It contained all the paperwork from the worst 2 days of my life, the days we lost our daughter. She was born too early, a tiny, fragile thing who fought for 36 hours before her little body gave out. Emma. We had planned to name her Emma after James's grandmother. She weighed 2 pounds and 3 ounces, and she fit in James's hands like a baby bird that had fallen from its nest too soon. It was the grief that had hollowed out my marriage, the silent, gaping wound that James and I could never find a way to bridge. We never spoke of it after the first year. After 12 months of tiptoeing around the subject like it was a landmine that might explode at any moment, we just stopped trying. It was easier to let the marriage crumble than to face the memory together. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open the folder. I flipped through the pages, doctor's notes written in illegible scrawl, lab results that meant nothing and everything all at once, charts filled with numbers that documented the brief arc of a life that never had a chance to begin. And then I saw it. Tucked into the back was a list of the nursing staff from the neonatal intensive care unit. It was comprehensive, listing everyone who had been involved in Emma's care during those terrible 36 hours. Full-time nurses, residents, attending physicians, and at the bottom, under the heading Student Nurse Observer, was a name that made the room tilt on its axis. Olivia Taylor. The room tilted. The air became thick, unbreathable, like I was trying to breathe underwater. It couldn't be. It was a common name. It had to be a coincidence. A sick, twisted coincidence that the universe had thrown at me like a cosmic joke. I scrambled for my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard with desperate urgency. I pulled up her nursing school graduation photo from her Facebook profile. The date stamp showed it was from 4.5 years ago, 6 months after our daughter's death. I cross-referenced the university with the hospital's student program listings. UC Davis had a clinical partnership with our hospital. The dates matched. The program matched. It was her. She had been there. She had been in that room with the beeping machines and the 2 bright lights and the smell of antiseptic that I could still recall if I closed my eyes. A silent observer, a student nurse in scrubs, watching the monitors as my world fell apart in real time. She had seen me at my absolute lowest, my most broken, my most vulnerable. She had witnessed the most private, soul-shattering moment of my life. The jealousy I had felt before was a pale, flimsy thing compared to the emotion that now consumed me. This was something colder, sharper, more terrifying. This perfect woman, this upgrade who was teaching my son guitar and fishing at our lake, and winning over my ex-husband with her sunshine smile, was a ghost from my past. She was a living reminder of the single greatest pain I had ever endured. And the blood-curdling question that immediately followed was, did James know? The possibilities spiraled in my mind like a tornado, each one more horrifying than the last. Was this some kind of sick, subconscious attempt on his part to reclaim what we had lost? Had he sought her out, this woman who was adjacent to our tragedy, in a twisted effort to heal, to build a new life on the ashes of our old one? The idea was monstrous, but I'd learned that people were capable of monstrous things when they were in pain. Or, and this possibility was almost worse, was it possible he had no idea? That fate, in its infinite cruelty, had thrown this woman back into our lives completely by chance. That he had innocently fallen for a woman who held a secret connection to our shared trauma, a secret that could destroy him if he knew. Suddenly, all of her perfect attributes took on a sinister new meaning. The pediatric nurse career, the endless compassion for sick children, the way she seemed drawn to situations where she could save people. Was her entire life an attempt to atone for something? A way to make up for the lives that couldn't be saved? Was she drawn to James because of some shared, unspoken link to that sterile, beeping hospital room where our daughter took her first and last breaths? I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't about a broken co-parenting rule anymore. This wasn't about my petty insecurities or my inability to move on. I was standing on a precipice, holding a piece of information that was a stick of dynamite. I could light the fuse. I could tell James and blow his new, happy world to pieces. It would burn their relationship to the ground like a wildfire, leaving nothing but ash and regret. But what would be left in the rubble? What would it do to him? To Noah? to the fragile peace we'd built over the past year. I had to know. I had to know if he was a monster or a fool. The next morning, I called him. My voice was eerily calm, controlled in the way that only comes from having moved beyond anger into something else entirely. We need to talk, in person, without Noah. The silence on his end was heavy, loaded with the weight of our shared history. He knew from my tone this wasn't another fight about the lake house or guitar lessons or any of the petty squabbles that had defined our post-divorce relationship. This was something bigger. "Okay," he said slowly, cautiously. "Where?" We met at a sterile coffee shop on the other side of town, a neutral territory that held no memories for either of us. It was the kind of place that served 12 different types of milk alternatives and had inspirational quotes written in cursive on the chalkboard walls. He sat across from me at a wobbly table, his expression guarded, waiting for the attack he was sure was coming. But I didn't yell. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just slid the manila folder across the table between us like I was dealing cards in a game neither of us wanted to play. "What's this?" he asked, his brow furrowed with confusion and the first hint of concern. He opened it, and I watched his face as he saw the hospital logo at the top of the first page. A shadow passed over his features like a cloud crossing the sun. The carefree man from the lake house photographs disappeared, replaced by the haunted, broken man I remembered from 5 years ago. The man who had held my hand in that terrible waiting room and promised me everything would be okay, even when we both knew it wouldn't be. "Why are you showing me this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with the kind of pain that never fully heals. "Page 12, I said, my own voice flat and emotionless. "At the bottom." He turned the pages with trembling fingers, and I watched him relive those terrible 48 hours through documentation and medical terminology. His breathing became shallow, and I could see him fighting to keep his composure. I saw the exact moment he found it. His whole body went rigid like he'd been electrocuted. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and shaken. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror that mirrored my own from the night before. "No," he breathed, "it can't be." And in that single word, I had my answer. He didn't know. He hadn't orchestrated this cosmic cruelty. He was a fool, not a monster. He was a victim of the same twisted fate that had brought this woman back into our lives like a ghost we couldn't exorcise. He just stared at the name on the page, then at me, then back at the name, like he was trying to make the letters rearrange themselves into something that made sense. How is this possible?" "I don't know, James," I said, and for the first time since I'd walked into that coffee shop, the anger was gone, replaced by a profound, shared sorrow that felt as heavy as gravity. "I don't know." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face in the gesture I remembered from our worst days. He looked utterly destroyed, like a man who had just discovered that the foundation of his new happiness was built on quicksand. "She never said anything. We've talked about everything. My past, the divorce, we even talked about losing Emma, about our daughter. Olivia held my hand and told me how strong I was for surviving it. She never said a word." The betrayal he felt was palpable, radiating from him like heat. It wasn't just that she was connected to the trauma. It was that she had knowingly kept it from him. She had watched him open up his deepest wounds, all while holding this monumental secret. She had let him fall in love with her while she carried the weight of knowing exactly where they had met before, in the worst moment of his life. "What are you going to do?" I asked quietly. He shook his head, looking lost and broken in a way that made me remember why I had loved him once. "I have to talk to her. I have to ask her why." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for something I couldn't give him. "Jennifer, I swear to you I had no idea. If I had known, I never would have." "I know," I said, and I did. Whatever else James was, selfish, sometimes thoughtless, incapable of dealing with grief in any healthy way, he wasn't cruel. He wasn't the kind of man who would deliberately torture us both by bringing the specter of our daughter back into our lives. He left the coffee shop in a daze, leaving the folder open on the table between us like evidence at a crime scene. I sat there for a long time, staring at Olivia's name written in neat hospital script, and feeling like I had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of 3 lives. I had gotten what I wanted, in a way. Their perfect relationship was fractured, maybe forever. But there was no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a deep, aching emptiness and the terrible knowledge that sometimes the truth causes more damage than the lies we tell to protect ourselves. I found out later what happened. He confronted her that night, showing up at her apartment with the folder in his hands and devastation written across his face. She confessed everything, the words tumbling out of her like water from a broken dam. She said she had recognized him on their second date, when he told her about losing a daughter 5 years ago. The pieces had clicked into place, and she realized he was the broken man from the NICU whose wife had sobbed herself unconscious on the hospital floor. She admitted that she had been terrified to tell him, convinced he would leave her if he knew she was a living ghost from his past. She claimed her career, her entire life's purpose, was shaped by what she witnessed in that room. She said seeing our family fall apart had made her want to dedicate her life to saving Bobby's because she had been there when ours couldn't be saved. She said she fell in love with him despite the connection, not because of it, but that the lie had just gotten too big to ever undo. It was a mess of good intentions, cowardice, and unforgivable deception. The kind of situation that proves the road to hell really is paved with good intentions and noble lies. Their relationship is over. He told me later that he couldn't look at her without being transported back to that hospital room, without seeing her not as the woman he was falling in love with, but as a witness to his greatest failure. He couldn't separate the woman he had started to love from the silent observer of his greatest tragedy. Their breakup was quiet and devastating, the kind that leaves everyone involved diminished. Now there's a new silence between James and me.